I was 7 years old the first time I learned that silence had a weight, and that women were expected to carry it. It was a Sunday in early spring. The kitchen smelled of yeast and wood smoke, and the long table was crowded with my father, my 4 brothers, my 2 older sisters, my mother, and me at the far end near the wall. I had been turning something over in my mind all morning, a question about a verse the preacher had read that day, and the words pushed up against my teeth until I couldn't hold them anymore. I started to speak. I got as far as the word dead before my oldest sister Hannah pressed her foot against mine under the bench. Just a small pressure, careful, almost gentle. The kind of touch a person uses when they don't want anyone else to notice. I looked up at her and she shook her head once, barely a movement at all, her eyes going first to my father and then back to her plate. My father hadn't even heard me. He was talking with my uncle about a fence line that needed mending before the rains came. But Hannah had heard me. Hannah, who was 15, who had once been a girl like me with questions of her own, had heard me start to speak and had reached across the bench to stop it before anyone else could. I closed my mouth. The question dissolved somewhere behind my tongue, and I understood, in the way children understand things long before they have language for them, that there were words in this house. And then there were the words a girl was permitted to say out loud. The two were not the same. My name is Martha. I was raised Old Order Amish in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in a farmhouse my great-grandfather built with his own hands. I walked away in my late 20s, and this is where I tell the stories my community taught me to swallow. If you want the deeper version of everything I'm sharing today, my full guide is waiting in the description below. Subscribe before you go any further, hit the like button, and down in the comments tell me this. Were you ever taught, in your own way, that taking up space was something you had to apologize for? I read every single comment and I write back when I can. Now let me tell you what the world does to a little Amish girl before she's old enough to spell her own name. The first thing it does is teach her without ever using words. Long before a girl can sit through a sermon, she is studying the geography of her own home. She sees who sits and who stands. She sees who gets the first plate of food and who eats whatever is left after the men push back from the table. She sees her mother carry water from the well while her father reads the German Bible by the lamp. She sees her uncles come in from the field, drop their boots by the door, and find supper already waiting, as if it had grown there on its own. As if no woman had been on her feet since 4 in the morning to make it appear. Nobody narrates any of this. Nobody has to. A child's eyes are sharper than any sermon. By the time I was 3, I was already trying to copy my mother, pretending to knead bread on a stool she dragged over for me. By 4, I was carrying small things, a folded dish rag, a tin cup, anything to be useful. By 5, I knew the order of the silverware drawer better than I knew my own prayers. By 6, I understood without ever being told that my brother Eli, who was younger than me by 18 months, was allowed to stand on the porch and watch the buggies go by, while I was needed inside. That is the first wall they build around you. It isn't made of rules. It's made of rhythm. You move with the women because there is nowhere else to move. You can't long for a different life when you've never been given a glimpse of one. The horizon ends at the kitchen wall, and the kitchen wall feels like the edge of the world. The second wall goes up around the time a girl turns 7, when the Ordnung starts to come into focus. The Ordnung is the rule that governs everything we wear, everything we say, everything we do, and yet you will never see it written down. Nobody hands you a book. You learn it the way you learn that the stove is hot, by getting close to it and being pulled back. And the pulling back happens more often and harder when you are a girl. My brother Eli could walk barefoot to the Stoltzfus farm half a mile down the road, and nobody asked where he'd gone. He could lean forward in the buggy and ask my father a question right in the middle of a sentence, and my father would answer him as if he were already a man. He could laugh too loud in church and get nothing more than a glance. When I did any of those things, the air in the room changed. I remember once, I was maybe 8, and a visiting minister was eating at our table. He said something about a passage in Romans, and I knew that he had the verse wrong. We had read it together as a family the week before. I started to say so. I had barely lifted my chin when my mother set the bowl of chow chow down in front of me with such precision that the pickles inside barely shifted. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. The bowl was a fence. The fence said, "Sit down inside yourself and stay there." After the minister left, she didn't scold me. She didn't even mention it. That was worse than scolding because there was nothing to push back against. She just dried her hands on her apron and said, almost to the window, "A girl who needs to be right has forgotten who she's becoming." I carried that sentence for 20 years. I still carry pieces of it. If you want to understand how a single sentence like that can shape a whole life, my deeper guide goes into all of it: the language, the layered control, the quiet ways a community trains a daughter to fold herself in half. The link is below. The third wall, and this is the one that nearly held me forever, is built out of scripture. Around the time you turn 8, the teaching shifts. It isn't only about chores and silence anymore. It becomes about your soul. You start to hear sermons about Gelassenheit, the German word at the center of everything we were. It means yielding. It means letting go of what you want. It means accepting whatever comes as God's will, without struggle, without questioning, without the sin of self. For the men, Gelassenheit was a virtue about pride. Don't build a bigger barn than your neighbor. Don't drive a finer horse. Don't put yourself above the brethren. For the women, Gelassenheit went deeper than that. It went all the way into the bone. A yielding wife, a yielding daughter, a yielding mind. A woman who could shape her own thoughts to fit the room she was standing in. That woman was holy. A woman who couldn't, well, that woman was the kind of woman the deacons whispered about after services. I was 9 when my cousin Lydia's mother left her marriage. She had bruises she couldn't hide anymore. And one Tuesday morning she packed a single bag and walked 4 miles to her sister's house in another district. Within a week, the bishop had spoken from the front of the church. And within a month, she was gone from us entirely, shunned. Her name no longer said at our table. The bishop's words that Sunday stay with me. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. He said quietly, almost sadly, that a woman who lifts her own judgment above her husband's has lifted it above the Lord's. He said she had chosen herself, and choosing yourself was the oldest sin there was, older than Eden, older than Cain. I was 9 years old, and I sat on that bench in my starched cape, and I felt the cold spread out from my chest into my hands. Because what he was telling me, what he was telling every girl in that room, was that if any of us ever needed to choose ourselves to survive, the price would not be a bruise. The price would be eternity. You don't recover quickly from a sentence like that. Some women never do. I had a friend later, after I'd left, a woman named Sarah who'd grown up in a Schwarzentruber district up in Ohio. Stricter than mine by a long way. She told me her grandmother used to recite the order of things to her like a nursery rhyme. God, then the ministers, then your father, then your husband, then the children, and somewhere in the spaces between, the women. Not on the list, in the spaces. Sarah said she was 11 before she realized she'd never once heard her grandmother laugh out loud. Not chuckled, not smiled. Laughed. Sarah said her grandmother had spent so many years trimming herself smaller that even joy had been measured down to something that wouldn't disturb the air. Sarah told me once, very quietly, over coffee in a diner outside Sugar Creek, that she had believed until she was 32 years old that wanting something for herself was a kind of theft. Theft from God, theft from her husband, theft from her children. She said it took 2 years of sitting in a small office across from a woman with kind eyes before she could even say the words, "I want," without flinching. And here's the part I need you to sit with for a moment, because if you've never lived it, it won't make sense from the outside. It did not feel like a prison. That is the hardest thing to explain. When every person you love lives inside the same walls, when those walls are built out of hymn singings and apple butter and the smell of your grandmother's quilt, and the sound of 40 buggies arriving for a wedding, the walls don't feel like walls. They feel like home. They feel like the only home there is. I loved my mother. I loved the way she hummed under her breath when she canned tomatoes. I loved how the community came together when the Beeler family lost their barn to lightning. 50 men there by sunrise, hammers already swinging. I loved my grandmother's hands. I loved the slow clop of Daisy's hooves on the way home from church when the sun was going down across the corn. None of that was a lie. None of that was performance. And still, you can love a place with your whole heart and know, somewhere underneath the loving, that it is asking you to leave parts of yourself outside the door before you come in. Both things can be true at the same time, and learning to hold them at the same time, without throwing one of them away, is the work of the rest of your life. What my community took from me, more than anything else, was the simple trust that what I felt was real. By the time I was 10, when something hurt, my first thought was never that the hurt was wrong. My first thought was always that I was wrong for feeling it. If I was tired, I was lazy. If I was sad, I was prideful. If I was angry, I was unyielding. Every uncomfortable feeling got rerouted, almost automatically, into evidence that I needed to try harder, soften more, disappear further. A girl learns to do that to herself so quickly that by the time she's old enough to question it, she no longer remembers any other way of feeling. If you want to understand how that reversal gets planted in a child, and how women eventually find their way back to themselves, the deeper guide in the description goes into every piece of it. Some of it I can't fit into one video, and I won't pretend otherwise. There was one woman, though. There is always one woman, isn't there? In stories like mine, there is almost always one. Her name was Miriam. She taught the lower grades at the schoolhouse down the lane from our farm. She was Amish through and through. Plain cape, plain dress, prayer cap tied beneath her chin, hands rough from her own washing. She was nothing rebellious to look at. She would have passed any inspection from any deacon in the county. But Miriam asked questions the way other people poured water. Carefully, generously, as if the listener mattered. She would stop in the middle of a lesson, set down her chalk, and turn to one of us, and she would say, "And what do you make of that, Martha?" Not what does the book say, not what is the right answer. What do you make of it? As if I were a person who made things. As if my mind were a place where something useful could happen. The first time she did it to me, I was 7, and I genuinely thought she had confused me with someone else. I looked behind me. I looked at the girl beside me. I looked back at Miriam, certain there had been a mistake. She just waited, hands folded in her apron, her eyes steady on mine. I don't remember what I said. I don't remember if it was clever or stupid. I only remember the feeling, the strange, dizzy, almost frightening feeling of being asked. I have wondered about Miriam every year since I left. I don't know if she's still in the community. I don't know if she ever married, or if she's still teaching, or if she went the way I went, quietly, with her cap in a paper bag and her heart in her throat. But I know that what she did, those small, simple acts of treating a 7-year-old girl as a thinker, drove a small nail into the wall of my cage that I would later, decades later, use to pry the whole thing open. When I was 10, I started to watch my mother the way a person watches weather. Not as a child watches a parent. Differently, carefully, with something behind my eyes that I would only later learn to call attention. I noticed that she never began a sentence without first glancing toward my father. Not for permission, exactly. For weather. To see if the room was clear enough to speak into. I noticed that when she disagreed with something my father said, she didn't disagree. She asked. She would tilt her head and say, "Do you think maybe it could be considered that?" And then trail off, letting her actual opinion drift out half-finished, like smoke she could deny lighting. She had spent so many years dressing up her own thoughts in the clothing of someone else's permission that her thoughts had forgotten how to walk into a room on their own. And I watched her, and I was 10 years old, and something inside me that had not yet been fully shaped, something the system had not yet finished smoothing down, said clearly, like a voice from across a field, "I will not learn to speak like that." I did not say it out loud. I did not say it to anyone for years. But the day I thought it, I crossed a line I could never uncross. The cage was still standing around me. The walls were still thick. But somewhere inside me, a small girl had picked up a single nail and decided to start scratching at the mortar. It would take another 15 years before I walked out of the gate. 15 years of folding myself up and putting myself away every morning. 15 years of biting back questions, of softening my voice, of training my face to show only what was wanted. 15 years of loving people who could not love the whole of me. But I had thought the thought. And once you have thought a thought like that, the cage stops being your whole world. It becomes a room in your world. And rooms have doors, even when the doors are hidden. A counselor I started seeing the year after I left, a woman who never once made me feel small for what I had believed, said something to me one afternoon that I have written down in 3 different journals since. She said, "The most powerful form of control isn't the kind that watches you. It's the kind that teaches you to watch yourself." By 10 years old, most Amish girls already know how to watch themselves. They already know how to catch a thought before it leaves the mouth. They already know how to translate their own pain into proof of their own pride. They already know how to want to be told they are sweet, they are quiet, they are gut. Because in a closed world, that praise is the difference between belonging and exile. And exile inside the only world you have ever known is a kind of death. That is not weakness. I want to say this as clearly as I know how. The girls who learn those lessons, who get very, very good at making themselves smaller, are not weak. They are intelligent. They are reading the situation correctly. They are doing what any thinking person does inside a system that holds belonging in one hand and shunning in the other. They are choosing to live. The cruelty was never in the girls. The cruelty was in giving them only that one choice. If you grew up somewhere, anywhere, that taught you your own needs were greedy, that your own voice was too much, that your worth was measured by how invisible you could become, I want you to hear something. What was put into you when you were too young to refuse it was not the truth. It was a script. Scripts can be read. Scripts can be set down. Once you can see the lines they handed you, once you can hear the difference between your own voice and the voice they trained you in, you have already started walking toward the door, even if you can't see it yet. I was not too young to scrub floors at 6. I was not too young to sit silent at the table at 7. I was not too young to be told my soul depended on my smallness at 9. I was only too young to know that another life was possible. If something in this story found a soft place in you, tell me about it in the comments. Tell me where it landed. Tell me if any piece of this sounded like a childhood you almost forgot you had. Even if your childhood had nothing to do with horses or caps or German hymns. Because the truth is, the tools they used on us, silence, belonging, the dressing up of obedience as holiness, the slow turning of a girl's pain into her own fault, those tools are not ours alone. They are very old, and they have been used in 1,000 different rooms, on 1,000 different children, under 1,000 different names. If you want to go further than a video can take you, the full guide is waiting in the description. There is so much more I haven't told you yet. And if you want me to keep telling the truth from beneath the prayer cap, subscribe before you close this. There are more stories. There are always more stories. Until I see you again, listen to me carefully. Your own thoughts were never a sin. They never were. They never could be. And the freedoms you choose for yourself now, even the small, quiet ones, may be the very things that carry you home to yourself.